What is going on, designers? We're going to be looking at doing a fire transition today, and I condensed this down to where you would be able to have this as a transition between any two of anything. And so I have this paper texture thing that I have thrown together, and if I go ahead, we're going to reveal our okay, hang on a second. It's supposed to show my cowboys. Oh, shy layers. You're so silly. Let's get rid of that video. And this is something that we would be able to duplicate and put anywhere that we want. We just need to make a few little changes here and there. But it's going to be pretty basic. You can make this a lot more advanced. You know, this would probably work well with adding particle effects off of this or doing more burn stuff. This won't be as genuine as doing something for real. Like if you think about the intro to Bonanza. I mean, was it the intro to Bonanza? Hey, yeah, look at that. I got it right. So let's get started by making a new composition. I'm just going to call this main. It doesn't matter how long it is because we're going to be building the transition out of it. And so whatever the duration is that you want to set up for, but I'll be doing this at 1920 by 1080 with an FPS of 23.976. Let's go ahead and get started. So first thing I want to do is add a solid layer, which you would be able to come up here to layer and do a new solid, or you can right click down here and do a solid. But I'm going to do Control Y, which is also going to be my solid here, and make sure that that is the comp size, and we're going to add this in. So we're going to create the base of our transition effect here. So I'm going to select my pen tool. So there's several ways that you would be able to do something like this. And with my layer selected, I'm just making a mask. So this is where we're going to do the main part of our transition here. And so we could either animate the mask path, or we can keep it easy on ourselves and just animate the mask expansion. I'm actually going to come out to about a second to give us a second setup here, and then reduce the expansion until we can't see any of that anymore. Gonna go ahead and click the stopwatch there to start a keyframe, move ahead about a second, and then we're going to expand this out until we are completely full of that solid again. So if we were to take a look at what we have here, and you know, once again, you could either do this with the mask expansion or animate the path. You could even do a combination of both, where as the mask is expanding, you would be able to animate the path to get a different shape, just kind of depending on what you're looking for. So we have that animated. I'm actually going to go ahead and cut this off about a second after the expansion ends here, and we're going to pre-compose this layer. And this is going to be our transition base. We should number what we're doing with our base. So I'm going to put in a 0, 1 because this is our first base. And we're going to move all attributes into the new composition. Make sure to adjust the composition duration to the time span of the selected layer. So we only have a 3-second composition that's happening here. I'm going to right away duplicate this and then turn it off by just hitting the eye here on the left side. We're going to go to our effects and presets, and we're going to look for roughen edges. But we're going to bump that up just a little bit. We're not going to do too much, and this is going to be the edge of what we're doing. When you start to see these little tendrils happen, we want to dial it back just slightly because we don't want this to be too crazy. This is the edge of where our effect is going to happen. So I'm going to turn off that layer and then turn back on our second layer that we duplicated here. I'm also going to add a roughen edges. So this is going to be the start of what is going to create the flame. We're going to do the roughen edges, but we're going to change this edge type to photocopy. And what's cool about this is it'll start to give us some of these little tendrils that are happening. We have the start of our flame that is going to be happening here. And it kind of takes away a lot of the alpha to what we have set up here. And we're going to need to fix this and dial it in later. But if we were to come down to this layer and duplicate it again with that setting on it, come to our effects and presets and select invert, I'm going to drop the invert on that layer and change the channel from RGB to alpha. And we're going to take that invert and actually put it before our roughen edges. So now we're starting to see what is going to be the start of our flame. So I'm going to select these two layers and we're going to pre-compose these, and we're going to call these our transition flame. And then we're going to go into our flame layer. What we're eventually trying to do is get gray data, not just this pure white. The problem is that this may look gray at the moment. Actually, let me hit Control K to open my composition settings. And I'm going to change this to more of a neutral gray, because all of this is transparency that's happening in the background. But what we need is something that is actually giving us gray information. So I'm going to hit Control Y to add a new solid, and I'm going to select black. Then I'm going to take that layer and drop it down to the bottom. So when I come back into my main layer later to turn this into a flame, we have all of this is now coming through as gray information instead of just white. Here, actually, I'll even demonstrate that here. So if I were to come in here and we were to add a tritone, it's not going to change anything, because the highlights are being told to translate to white, but it's not going to be changing anything. And to prove that, let's turn it to black. We can see most everything is changing. We have some gray information that's happening on this band for the flame, but it's not enough. So I'm going to come in here and we're going to turn on this black solid again in our flame composition. And when I come back here, we notice that we're getting a lot more color information. Let me change this to something like a blue. We could kind of see what's happening here. Because all of this is now, instead of just being white with different levels of alpha, it's now actually coming through as gray information because all of the alpha is at 100% now. We'll just go ahead and keep that there. I'm going to go back into my flame and let's do some adjustments here. So with each of the things that we did here, I'm going to turn off this top base layer that I have the photocopy on, and I'm going to increase this just a little bit. Since the transition is happening here, and this is kind of where the flame is starting, I don't want it to be super tenderly with how the flames will be made, but I want it just a little bit here. I'm going to come into my other base, and then we're going to bump this up quite a bit. This is going to be our main path for the flame kind of working its way outward. But we also need to get rid of this weird gray matter that's happening, because all I really want is this ring of fire that's happening here. So I'm going to come down to my layers and we're going to add an adjustment layer. And in effects and presets, I'm going to add a levels. And all we're going to do is start to make adjustments to this until basically all of this black matter in between is completely clear of all the white specks that we had going on. I think that actually looks really good as it is right now. But we want to give this a little bit more variety. And since I have this adjustment layer, I'm going to actually rename this. This is going to be my levels adjustment. And I'm going to duplicate this, and this will be more of my making variety on what we have here for the flames. So I'm going to, it's not really what it's doing, but let's just call it random. I'm going to go to our effects and presets again, and we're going to drop in a turbulent displace. This will just kind of make give a bit more randomness to the flames. We want this to be a bit more subtle than anything, just kind of give it a bit more variety. So I'm going to drop the size. We're going to drop the amount as well too. And let's take a look at how that is transitioning now. So yeah, let's see if we could just maybe give it a little twist. See how that looks. Okay. Yeah, just something that's a little bit broken up. We just mess around with these values here until we get something that we like. We could also go ahead and animate the evolution. So I'm going to alt click on the stopwatch for evolution. I'm going to do time times, yeah, we're going to crank this up a bit. So I'm going to do time times 500 for the evolution to just give it a bit of personality. You can see more of what's happening on the edges here than what is happening here, since the transition is happening so quick. But yeah, it's just something that's a bit more subtle. I also want to break this up a little bit more. So I'm going to take our black solid that we have down here and duplicate it and bring it above our layers with the transition, but below our adjustment layers here. So I'm going to go into the middle, and then we're going to go to effects and presets, and I'm going to grab a fractal noise, drop it right on top of there, and we're going to change the blending mode of this from normal to multiply. And what I'm trying to do is break up a bit more of this to be a little bit more random. So if I turn this off, we can see we're getting more grays kind of being introduced in there, but we also don't want all of our whites to really go away completely. So we're gonna make some adjustments here until we get something that looks like it's breaking up, but it's not completely going away. So I'm gonna make some adjustments here. Actually, I'm gonna increase the border on my rough and edges a little bit, just to kind of give it a little bit more. Come in here and let's increase. So the more I increase the amount on the turbulent displays, the more kind of weird it gets. I'm going to come back into my fractal noise, and I want to animate the evolution on this as well too, and we're going to crank it up pretty high. So I'm going to alt click on evolution stopwatch once again, do time times, let's say 800, just something crazy. Want to kind of get rid of this seam that's happening across our work here. So I'm going to go into the adjustment layer that had our levels, and we're just going to blur it just slightly to give it a little bit. Let's get rid of that seam, not too much. Excellent. So let's go back into our main comp. For the tritone, I want to actually switch what we have going on here. So this is set up where the shadows are super dark, but if I turn this off, I kind of want the darkest spots to be the whitest spots here. So what I'm going to do instead is choose something that's a bit of a darker orange for my highlight. I'm going to make sure to turn that on so I can see what we're doing here. For the midtones, we're going to do kind of a darker yellow. Maybe something like that. And then for my shadows, and this will be the things that are closest to our grays here, I'm going to have this be a bit of a lighter yellow. But of course, that is affecting everything that we have here. So we need to do one thing. Go to our effects and presets, look for a linear color key. I'm going to drop that on top of our flame layer here, and I'm going to turn off the tritone so that way I get an accurate key, and we're going to do this black. And we're going to do that, and that should have worked. However, I think my background is black, so that's not going to work for me here. And it's going to take away everything that is pure black. You can make adjustments to the softness. You want it just a little bit soft so that way it doesn't have a harsh edge to it. But you don't want to go too crazy, because these dark grays that are coming in here is what I want to have picked up by my shadows here. So I'm going to go slightly into the red. But we're going to be able to adjust that later. And make sure the linear color key is before our tritone. So that way, now we have something that wants to be a flame, but it's not quite there. So we're going to go to our effects and presets and add a glow. And I'm going to increase the radius just a little bit on this glow, drop the intensity, and then find a nice spot. that I like. You don't want things to be too crazy because we are going to add another glow. So we can experiment a bit here. And so all I'm going to do, and so I just duplicated the glow here with the Control D. I'm going to drop the radius on this glow, but increase the intensity just to give it a little bit of a different quality, and then find a threshold that I am liking here. And then just play around with both the colors that you're using in the tritone. You want to maintain the highlight as something a bit darker. And let's go more into the red with that, just to give it a little bit of that. Make this a little orangey for our midtones. And then mess with the glow until you get something that is close to what you're looking for. So there we go. I think that's pretty cool. You can also duplicate flame and make some further adjustments. Like if you wanted to have just a more general glow that's sort of happening, you could come in here and mess with that a little bit. Here, let me actually turn off my second glow for a second to see if this is going to be enough. This is just kind of more of an ambient glow that I'm trying to add to everything. If I were to add this, what would that look like? Oh, that would look a bit more gaudy than I'd like. It's actually not bad. If I wanted to go back into base and make an adjustment to this mask, say I wanted it to all happen over here instead. Let's move all of that over there. Make some sort of weird, unique shape. So now it kind of looks like that. We go back into our main composition. We can see that we are now animating like that. So how would I animate between two images or two videos now? I would like to animate from something to these cowboys. So I'm going to start a new solid, and let's choose a color that is kind of a faded sort of paper color. Yeah, let's go with that. And I'm going to pre-compose this. So we're just going to make a paper texture. So I'm going to say paper. And we're going to go inside paper. I'm going to duplicate this solid. I'm going to put a fractal noise on our new layer. For the paper texture, I tend to like, for a fractal type, we're going to go down to dynamic and change the noise type from soft linear to spline. And we can mess around a bit with the contrast and the brightness here, but I'm going to turn this layer off, and we're going to essentially use this as a texture. So I'm going to go to our effects and presets once again, texturize on top of the bottom layer that we don't have the fractal noise on. And I'm going to use the texture layer for the fractal noise as the texture layer for this. So I'm going to select that here, but I'm going to change this from source to effects and masks. So that way it applies the fractal noise effect onto that layer before using it as a texture, and we can make adjustments here. But this, you come in and mess around with contrast. You see, kind of gets all rocky looking. Make any adjustments that you want to the fractal noise, and that'll affect what's here. I'm gonna go back into the main comp. I'm gonna drop this on top of my cowboys, and I'm going to move all of our flame and stuff. I'm going to move that ahead a little bit. Now, I'm going to come into the middle here where this transition is happening, and I don't want these flames to be going on in the middle of or around the edges here. If you want that, then that's great. I do not. So I'm going to select all of them and scale it up until I can't see any of those flames anymore. So now we have something that looks like this. But I also don't want my transition comp to have to cover the entire bit that I have here. So I want to be able to have no alpha here to then turn into whatever this transition would be. So I'm going to take my paper, make sure my base is on top of my paper layer here, and then I'm going to apply a track matte. I'm going to do an alpha inverted matte, and that's going to take away everything that is that paper until we get to the end here. Now, we want to, when this transition comes here in full, I'm going to take this paper and cut off. So that way, when we finally get to the full cowboys here, we don't have to worry about anything with the flames or the transitions or anything like that. But since it's revealing everything that's underneath, we don't have to worry about cutting off the cowboys. We just want to make sure that when the transition starts, that our cowboys are showing up. Because if this was a little bit ahead, you can see that we're going to jump in with the cowboys there. So just make sure that the layer we are revealing is also happening before this transition. And so from the project here, I'm going to select both of these layers and hit Control D, which will duplicate those, but it'll also iterate that number. So now we have flame and base 02. I'm going to open up my flame and select these two base layers that I have here and come up to the project, select the base 2, and I'm going to hold Alt while I drag this down on top of my selected layers here. This is going to change it to base 2. That's actually all we need to do because we just end up coming up here ahead. I'm going to drop in my base and my flame here. Actually, I'm not going to do that because what I'm going to do, I have a whole bunch of settings that are going on here. So I'm going to select my transitions here. I'm going to duplicate that, move it up here to the top. I'm going to move this aside. We're going to do the same thing with these. So I'm going to select my base and I'm going to hold Alt while I drag this on top of my base. And we can see that that changed from 1 to 2. I'm going to select my two flame layers and I'm going to drop 2 on top of that. And that is all changed. And then if I go into my base 2, I can make adjustments to this mask. So let's just take all of it and move it over here to the side. And if that's all I wanted to do for this new transition, that's all that's necessary to duplicate this transition. So if I wanted to get out of my cowboys here, I duplicated my layer here, but I want to take off the track mat for a second. And we don't have to worry about order here necessarily, but I want to move my transition base on top of my cowboys layer, do the same thing, add a track mat, do an alpha inverted mat, and then make sure that my paper is showing up underneath that. So if I move that ahead here, and so now we have a transition going back to our paper, and no one is the wiser. But one problem that we have here is this is not expanding all the way. So I'm going to go back into this base layer and hit U on this layer because all we need to do is just expand this mask just a little bit. There we go. And there we have it. Now we have a second transition that is happening with everything that is set up for the first transition. So this is all happening procedurally. This is all happening the same settings, everything else. You could come in here and make adjustments all you want to be able to get a little bit of variety if that's what you're looking for. But that's pretty much it. That is our fire transition, and we'll just leave on these cowboys and whatever they're talking about. Until next time, everybody. See you then.